Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
Good morning and welcome to today's episode. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and each day I invite you to join me as we reflect on a significant moment from our shared past. Today is November 26th, and we're looking back 236 years to November 26th, 1789. On that Thursday, Americans across the young nation observed the first National Day of Thanksgiving, proclaimed by President George Washington. Churches held services. Families gathered for meals. People paused to reflect on the blessings of liberty, harvest, and the peaceful establishment of a new government under the Constitution. It's a holiday we still celebrate, though our modern Thanksgiving looks very different from Washington's. We've added pilgrims and Plymouth Rock, turkey and football, a specific fourth Thursday in November, and a mythology about the holiday's origins that bears little resemblance to historical reality. But underneath all that, Washington's original purpose remains, a moment to pause as a nation and express gratitude. The story of how Thanksgiving evolved from Washington's one-time proclamation to our modern national holiday reveals how we construct national narratives, how presidents shape culture, and how holidays serve political and social purposes beyond their surface meanings. It's a story about gratitude, yes, but also about power, identity, and the ongoing project of defining what it means to be American. The first national Thanksgiving came at President Washington's initiative, though he was responding to a request from Congress. In September 1789, just months after Washington's inauguration, Congress passed a resolution asking the president to recommend to the people of the United States a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many and signal favors of Almighty God. This was the new government flexing its muscles. The Constitution had been ratified less than a year earlier. Washington had been inaugurated in April. The Bill of Rights was still being debated. Everything was new, experimental, and uncertain. Congress wanted a public demonstration of national unity and gratitude for the peaceful transition to constitutional government. Washington issued his proclamation on October 3, 1789, designating Thursday, November 26, as a national day of thanksgiving. The proclamation was eloquent and comprehensive. Americans were to give thanks for the peaceable and rational manner in which they'd been able to establish a government, for the civil and religious liberty they enjoyed, for the means they had to acquire knowledge, for the opportunities to secure their safety and happiness, and to pray for continued blessings, including good government, protection from danger, and promotion of true religion and virtue. It was simultaneously religious and civic, personal and national. Americans were to thank God for religious freedom, including the freedom of those who didn't share the majority's faith. They were to be grateful for the opportunity to govern themselves peacefully. The tone was humble, acknowledging blessings already received while hoping for continued favor. Importantly, Washington was careful. The proclamation recommended rather than commanded observance. It respected the distinction between federal authority and individual conscience. This wasn't a mandatory religious observance, but a suggested civic ritual. Not everyone approved. The idea of a national day of Thanksgiving was more controversial than you might expect. Thomas Jefferson opposed it on constitutional grounds. He believed the federal government had no business proclaiming religious observances, even voluntary ones. Religion was a matter for states and individuals, not the national government. When Jefferson became president, he refused to issue any Thanksgiving proclamations, setting a precedent that lasted until Madison renewed the practice during the War of 1812. Others objected on different grounds. Some thought it smacked of monarchy. European kings declared feast days and religious observances. Republican governments shouldn't. Others worried it violated the separation of church and state. Some states already had their own Thanksgiving traditions and resented federal intrusion. The controversy reflected deeper anxieties about federal power in the new republic. The Constitution had created a stronger central government than the Articles of Confederation. But exactly how strong? Could the president proclaim a national day of prayer? If so, what else could the federal government do in matters of religion and conscience? These weren't abstract questions. They went to the heart of what kind of nation America would be. Washington's careful wording tried to navigate these concerns. He recommended rather than commanded. He emphasized gratitude for liberty, including religious liberty. He acknowledged those of different faiths or no faith. But the controversy showed that even something as seemingly benign as a day of thanks could become politically charged in a young nation still defining its identity. Washington wasn't inventing something from nothing. Thanksgiving days had deep roots in American colonial culture. The Pilgrims' 1621 harvest celebration at Plymouth, the event we now mythologize as the first Thanksgiving, was actually just one of many harvest festivals and days of Thanksgiving common throughout colonial New England. Days of Thanksgiving and days of fasting were regular features of Puritan religious life, proclaimed by governors in response to specific events: a good harvest, a military victory, deliverance from disease, or conversely to seek divine help during drought, war, or epidemic. These weren't annual holidays, but occasional observances tied to specific circumstances. They were also primarily New England phenomena. The southern colonies didn't share this tradition. Virginia had harvest celebrations and religious feast days, but not the Puritan Thanksgiving tradition. During the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress proclaimed several days of Thanksgiving. After Saratoga, after the French alliance, after the British surrender at Yorktown. These were celebrations of specific military and diplomatic victories, thanking God for favorable turns in the war. So Washington had precedent, but his 1789 proclamation was different. This wasn't Thanksgiving for a specific event, but for the general blessings of liberty and good government. It was attempting to create a shared national ritual in a country where such rituals didn't really exist yet. Washington's 1789 Thanksgiving didn't immediately become an annual tradition. He proclaimed Thanksgiving days in 1789 and 1795, but then the practice lapsed. Jefferson's principled opposition was one factor. He refused to issue Thanksgiving proclamations during his 8 years as president, and his views were influential. Madison eventually resumed the practice during the War of 1812, proclaiming Thanksgiving days in 1814 and 1815 to celebrate military victories and peace. But after Madison, presidents stopped proclaiming national Thanksgiving days for nearly 50 years. Part of the issue was regional. Thanksgiving remained primarily a New England tradition. Southern states didn't celebrate it and saw no need for the federal government to impose northern customs. Western territories had their own traditions. A national Thanksgiving felt artificial outside New England. Part was philosophical. The Jeffersonian view that the federal government should stay out of religious matters Even voluntary religious observances remained influential. America had no established church and no tradition of state-sponsored religious holidays. Many Americans wanted to keep it that way, and part was simply that the nation was still forming its identity. Shared national rituals take time to develop. The United States in the early 19th century was a loose confederation of diverse regions with different cultures, different economies, and different religious traditions. Creating genuinely national holidays that resonated across all regions was difficult. Thanksgiving would need another crisis, the Civil War, and another president, Abraham Lincoln, to become the annual national holiday we know today. In 1863, in the midst of the Civil War's darkest days, Abraham Lincoln revived Washington's tradition and transformed it into something permanent. Lincoln had proclaimed several Thanksgiving days earlier in the war for specific military victories. But in October 1863, urged by magazine editor Sarah Josepha Hale, who had campaigned for years to make Thanksgiving a national holiday, Lincoln proclaimed a national day of thanksgiving and praise to be observed on the last Thursday of November. The timing was significant. The Union had won crucial victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg that summer, turning the tide of the war. But enormous challenges remained. Lincoln wanted to build national unity, to create shared rituals that bound Americans together, and to express gratitude even in wartime suffering. Lincoln's proclamation had a different tone than Washington's. Where Washington emphasized gratitude for peace and good government, Lincoln acknowledged continuing civil war of unequaled magnitude and severity, but insisted on giving thanks anyway, for population growth, for resources preserved, for divine mercy. It was Thanksgiving not because everything was good, but to maintain perspective and hope when everything seemed dark. Lincoln proclaimed Thanksgiving again in 1864, and his successors continued the tradition. By the 1870s, Thanksgiving had become an established annual observance. In 1941, Congress finally made it official, designating the fourth Thursday of November as the legal federal holiday. The Thanksgiving we celebrate today bears little resemblance to Washington's 1789 observance. We've layered on mythology that serves purposes far beyond Washington's original intent. The Pilgrim story became central to Thanksgiving during the 19th century, particularly after New England historians and writers promoted it as a founding American narrative. The 1621 harvest celebration at Plymouth, which the participants didn't call Thanksgiving, and which probably bore little resemblance to our imaginings, became the origin story of the holiday known as Thanksgiving. This mythology served several purposes. It gave Thanksgiving a specific origin story, more compelling than Washington proclaimed it. It emphasized themes of religious freedom, cooperation between Europeans and Native Americans, and gratitude in adversity. It created a founding narrative that was religious but not denominationally specific, allowing diverse Americans to embrace it. But the mythology obscures reality. The Pilgrim's 1621 celebration wasn't the first Thanksgiving in North America. Spanish colonists in Florida and Texas held Thanksgiving celebrations decades earlier, as did English colonists in Virginia. It wasn't the origin of the holiday. Washington created the national holiday in 1789, drawing on New England traditions that post-dated Plymouth, and the cooperation between Pilgrims and Wampanoag people, while real in 1621, gives way within a generation to King Philip's War and the devastating conquest of New England's native peoples. We've also transformed the meal. Turkey became standard, though Washington's contemporaries ate various meats. Specific side dishes, cranberry sauce, stuffing, pumpkin pie, became canonical, creating a meal recognizable across regions. Football became traditional in the 20th century. Shopping the next day, Black Friday, became an American ritual. These additions reflect changing American culture, commercialization, media influence, and consumer capitalism. The evolution of Thanksgiving reveals how nations construct shared narratives and how holidays serve purposes beyond their apparent meanings. First, holidays build national identity. Lincoln understood this. By making Thanksgiving an annual holiday during the Civil War, he was trying to create a shared national ritual that would outlast the war and help reunify the country. Holidays give diverse populations common experiences, creating the imagined community that nations require. Second, founding myths matter more than founding facts. The Pilgrim story became Thanksgiving's origin myth, not because it's historically accurate, but because it tells a story Americans want to believe. Religious freedom, cooperation across differences, gratitude in hardship, and successful settlement. The actual history is more complicated and less uplifting, but myths serve purposes facts can't. Third, holidays evolve. Washington's Thanksgiving was religious and civic. Lincoln's was about unity during a crisis. 20th century Thanksgiving became about family, abundance, and consumption. 21st century Thanksgiving increasingly includes acknowledgement of Native American perspectives and historical complexities. Each generation reshapes the holiday to serve its needs. Fourth, national observances can be controversial. Jefferson's opposition to federal Thanksgiving proclamations reflected genuine principle, not mere partisanship. The tension between creating a shared national culture and respecting religious and regional diversity remains real. Not everyone celebrates Thanksgiving. Some Native Americans observe it as a day of mourning. Some religious groups object to mixing civic and sacred. These tensions are features, not bugs. They reflect the genuine pluralism of American society. Finally, gratitude itself is political. Choosing to give thanks, deciding what we're grateful for and to whom, is never neutral. Washington gave thanks for liberty and good government, implicitly celebrating the constitutional order. Lincoln gave thanks during the war, implicitly arguing that divine providence favored the Union. Modern Thanksgiving gratitude for family and abundance implicitly celebrates American prosperity. What we choose to be thankful for reveals what we value. On this November 26th, 236 years after Washington's first national Thanksgiving, the holiday raises questions we're still grappling with. How do we create shared national rituals in an increasingly diverse and divided nation? Thanksgiving is perhaps the most universally observed American holiday. More people celebrate Thanksgiving than July 4th or Memorial Day. Yet even Thanksgiving means different things to different Americans. Some see religious observance, others secular gratitude. Some celebrate abundance, while others critique the costs of that abundance. Some emphasize pilgrim mythology, others reckon with that mythology's blind spots. How do we balance myth-making with historical honesty? Should we teach children the simplified pilgrim story because it's age-appropriate and conveys important values? Or should we complicate that story from the start, acknowledging that Thanksgiving's actual history is messy? There's no easy answer. We need both inspiring narratives and honest reckoning. How do we express gratitude without complacency? Washington and Lincoln both gave thanks while acknowledging problems and seeking continued improvement. Gratitude shouldn't mean acceptance of injustice or inequality. Finding that balance, appreciating blessings while working for change, remains difficult. And fundamentally, what are we grateful for? That's not abstract. Washington was grateful for the Constitution and peaceful government. Lincoln was grateful for perseverance through crisis. What should modern Americans be thankful for? The question is worth asking because the answer reveals what we value as a nation. Perhaps Washington's most enduring insight was simply that gratitude matters, that pausing to appreciate blessings, express thanks, and recognize how much we depend on others and on fortune is valuable, individually and nationally. Research confirms what Washington intuited. Gratitude improves well-being, strengthens relationships, and builds resilience. Nations, like individuals, benefit from occasionally pausing to appreciate rather than only criticizing, to acknowledge blessings rather than only lamenting problems. This doesn't mean ignoring problems or pretending everything is wonderful. Lincoln gave thanks during the Civil War. Washington gave thanks while knowing enormous challenges lay ahead. Gratitude and clear-eyed assessment aren't opposites. They're complementary. The tradition Washington started was never just about a meal or a day off. It was about creating space for reflection, for acknowledging interdependence, for recognizing that our flourishing depends on countless factors beyond our control. That remains worth doing, even 236 years later, even when the pilgrim mythology has been complicated and the holiday has been commercialized. On every fourth Thursday in November, Americans still do what Washington asked. We pause, we gather, we give thanks. The forms have changed enormously, but the underlying purpose, creating a moment of shared national gratitude, endures. Thank you for joining me today on the Daily History Chronicle. As philosopher George Santayana reminds us, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Today we saw how Washington's first Thanksgiving proclamation launched a tradition that would evolve over centuries, accumulating mythology and meaning, becoming a holiday that reveals how nations construct shared narratives and how gratitude itself can be both personal and political, reminding us that the stories we tell about our holidays matter as much as the holidays themselves, and that pausing to give thanks, even in difficult times, remains valuable both individually and collectively. The Thanksgiving you celebrate tomorrow has traveled a long, complicated journey from Washington's 1789 proclamation, but his core insight that gratitude strengthens individuals and nations endures. Until tomorrow, may your day be enriched by the lessons of history.